Why don't we begin? We have very limited time in this session, and we have a terrific panel and a fascinating topic that's really on the top of the agenda in many companies. And so let's begin if we could. And this panel is talking about a topic. The title is, of course, Corporate Global Citizenship in the 21st Century. And I think that reflects a very different emerging perspective about the role of the corporation in many social and societal issues. Traditionally, corporations have been seen as principally an engine of economic progress. Their job is to make money, hire people, invest, and run successful businesses. But over time, companies have been asked and pressured to do more, to play a larger role, to get involved in many issues, numerous issues: health, environment, obesity, and countless other issues. And this process of corporate involvement in the broader societal agenda has evolved dramatically, as Prime Minister Brown said a moment ago. It really started out as pressure politics. There was a pitched battle between the corporation and society and social advocates. Then we kind of entered the phase of giving and philanthropy and CSR, where corporations were really concerned about reputation and image and mollifying the critics through a lot of philanthropic activity. But we've clearly entered a new stage. Which Professor Schwab in his article in Foreign Affairs called global citizenship or corporate citizenship. It's a stage where instead of seeing the corporate agenda and the social agenda as conflicting or in any conflict, the effort is to try to integrate those agendas. And corporations are now in very different ways, using very different means, working very, very aggressively on a variety of social issues, often in partnership with each other and with government. So the purpose of this panel is to explore some of those issues. What do we mean by global corporate citizenship? How do you do it? What works? What role does government have in the process? What are the limits? Should corporations take on every issue, or are there some issues that should be reserved for government? And we have here a panel of really true innovators and leaders in this area. So let's get on with the discussion. I'd like to ask John Chambers to start from Cisco. John, why should corporations be involved in global corporate citizenship? What does that really mean?
To me, the most successful in life owe an obligation to give back. And I think it's not just the right thing to do, it's just plain good for business. The second issue is that only by working together in unusual combinations, which were new to us, between government, as the Prime Minister worded it, between NGOs and businesses toward a common goal, can you achieve the differences. We found out early on with network academies, where we have 2.5 million students trained on a global basis, 700,000 per year being trained, 25% of them female in the emerging markets, that it's both the right thing to do for business, but it's also good. And I think a key takeaway point is, if you look at the high-tech companies that are involved here, the Googles, the Microsoft, the Cisco, the Intel, those are 4 of the top 5 most valuable companies in the world. It was actually in Jordan, as a result of the World Economic Forum, where we went with 17 other companies, and His Majesty King Abdullah and Her Majesty Queen Rania said, well, you'll be successful in Jordan because you give back. And I made the mistake 8 years ago saying I will probably never make money in Jordan, and maybe not even in the Middle East. And today we're very successful in Jordan. The Middle East for us is bigger than all of China or India, and it's been the combination of doing the right thing, being able to really make a substantive difference, huge impact on your customers, and candidly huge impact on your employees. So I want to really push the businesses in the audience to say, you can make a difference, now's the right time, and it is also very good for your business.
Peter Sands, how do you pick what areas to focus on? There's any number of social issues, there's many worthy causes, there's many priorities. How do you pick the areas that the company ought to be engaging in?
I think the first point is that you have to make choices. It's one of the first things you learn in business, that you can't do everything. The tests that we apply are, first, it's got to be something that is relevant to our markets. We operate across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. It's got to be something that leverages our capabilities and infrastructure. And the ideal, the real sweet spot, is when it's something that we can truly embed into the business and make into a business, because I think that's when it becomes really sustainable and scalable. And then lastly, it's got to be something where we think we can make a distinctive impact. To give you an example, microfinance. Obviously, there's a huge requirement around financial inclusion in our parts of the world. Microfinance is fundamentally banking. It plays to our core skills. And it is an area where we think we can do something quite distinctive. We've committed to making 500 million available for microfinance, and we're well on our way to building up to that target. A slightly different example would be, we've done a lot of work around preventable blindness. Most of the preventable blindness in the world is in our parts of the world, particularly in South Asia and Africa. And this is sort of further along the corporate philanthropy end of the spectrum, because we are giving and we are raising money. But we are actually using our local staff, our local infrastructure, to support the NGOs as they scale up and deliver cataract operations and the like. So that's our test. It's relevance to the markets, it's leveraging infrastructure and capabilities, so it's core to the business, and it's being distinctive.
Thank you. Mr. Wang, it's kind of been traditionally seen that corporate citizenship and responsibility is what multinationals from the advanced economies do. But your company in China is taking a leadership role in this area. Why should a company in a developing country worry about social responsibility?
Yes. I think global corporate citizens means the companies with social responsibility and international vision. And even in developing countries, the companies should take social responsibilities. I like to take an example for the rural mobile communication service to bridge the digital divide in China. In China Mobile now have a rural service. We now cover about 97% of populations. In China, about 700 million people live in rural areas. And when we provide the rural service, we not only create values to the customers and to make them getting more information, and we also generate the revenue and reduce the cost for ourselves. For example, China Mobile, we now have 370 million subscriber base. And every month, we still get 6 million net addition to our subscriber base. And more than 60% of new subscribers from rural area because of the lower cost, although the low ARPU, low usage, but we still can keep a very good margin. But in some areas, in some most remote villages, we could not make profit, but we think it is the universal service it is worth. Thank you.
So we're going to let the business folks talk first, and then we're going to call on the government leaders to kind of reflect on what they're hearing and talk a little bit about their role. Indra, Nooyi, could you talk about how one goes about making these initiatives successful? And in particular, I think what we're seeing is more and more companies not just doing things themselves, but working in collaboration with many different kinds of organizations. What does it take to actually make these collaborations effective?
Let me begin by saying that there's a requirement to make initiatives like this successful, which is to mobilize the entire corporation, all the employees, to be committed to the success of the effort. And in order to mobilize them, you've actually got to touch their emotions. And I can speak about our company, and I know this is not a commercial on PepsiCo, but a year ago we articulated a direction which is performance with purpose. How can we as a company do better by doing better for society? Initially, it was something new for the company. We didn't quite expect what this would do to the company, but it's unleashed the emotions of everybody in the company, And a group of people who already loved coming to work now say they're proud to come to work because we're going to make a difference in society. And when you take 170,000 employees and unleash their emotions all over the world, there's a multiplying factor, and all of a sudden things happen that we never expected would happen. So the first thing is you've got to unleash the emotions of everybody in the company, and I think we've done it. The second goes to what Davos is all about. For us to engage on social programs, we cannot do it alone. We are little republics. We do know that. We wield an enormous amount of power because we are bigger than many economies. But a lot of social issues have to be done in partnership with governments. So one of the requirements to execute these projects is to work closely with governments, work closely with NGOs, and together have a shared vision of what that great future will be, because if societies succeed, companies succeed. We all act in enlightened self-interest, and so it's critically important that partnerships work. But for partnerships to work, governments have to accept that private sector is a force for good in society, and that we want to be good, not just in the commercial sense, but in the moral sense too. And if there's a real partnership, I think we can make music.
Your Majesty, you're from a developing country with many needs and many challenges. How's business important, and how is it able to advance the agenda of your country?
Well, let me just begin by saying that to me, corporate citizenship is about humanizing globalization. For the past couple of decades, the world economies have been integrating at a very accelerated pace, propelled by the desire to tap into new markets, to increase scale, to lower costs, and ultimately to maximize profit. But in the process, I think we've left many people behind, and we've neglected our environment. And I think increasingly business leaders are trying to right these wrongs, because they realize that if they don't, it can have both social, economic, and sometimes even political implications to them. And I'm encouraged by the path that companies are taking in that course, because there are two trends that are emerging that I think are very positive. Firstly, what you talked about, which is integration. Companies now are choosing their causes according to their core business values and seeing where they can have a value added. So aligning their causes with their business means that they will have a lot of impact, which is very important. So an IT company now, instead of just investing in education in general, it is investing in putting computers into schools or in sending software, which has a much higher impact. The other trend is the fact that we're working in partnership. And we're realizing the importance of these partnerships, because one of the most important development lessons that we have learned over the past decades is that governments cannot do it alone. There have been some progress in different fields, but the Millennium Development Goals tell us that we still have a very long way to go. Today, we still have over 70 million children out of school, 44 million of them girls. We still have 530,000 women who die in childbirth, 4 million newborns who die each year, 2 million who perish from preventable disease. So clearly, single sector interventions are not successful. And I can't help but wonder what the guys at Google would do if they were presented with the challenge of 44 million girls out of school. I'm sure they'll come up with some very creative ideas. And look what Bill Gates has done for global health. So increasingly, we are realizing that we need companies not just for their resources, but for their resourcefulness, for their ability to give good ideas, inject talent and skill, and maximize efficiency. Now, in the Arab world, corporate responsibility is more than a concept, but it's still not a culture. And we still have a long ways to go, partly because our societies still turn to governments for answers. We are not really 100% aware of what corporations can do for us, and therefore we haven't applied enough pressure. Having said that, we are seeing some initiatives gaining traction, and I'm hoping that these initiatives become the trend and then in the future become the norm. And what's encouraging is a lot of the social values that underpin corporate citizenship are deeply entrenched in our system. So increasingly, Arab businessmen are beginning to realize that these deeply entrenched social values go hand in hand with market values. So as you mentioned, John, we had the Jordan Education Initiative, for example, which was launched here in Davos 5 years ago, where private sector companies, both local in Jordan and international, such as Cisco, Microsoft, Intel, and others, have tried to apply technologies into our classrooms and see how they can inspire new ways of teaching and learning. And it's been a very successful example, replicated now in Egypt, Rajasthan, and Palestine, with some very good results. So I think we in the Arab world are beginning to put our arms around this concept and to take it further, and I'm very encouraged that we'll make more progress.
Prime Minister, you've been trying to engage companies in economic development and many other activities for many years. I've been personally witnessed some of those efforts myself. There's a tendency, and the UK is no exception here, there's a tendency for corporations to stand back and say these social issues are really the role of government. You guys handle this, we in business, leave us alone, we'll go run our business. How do you actually get companies engaged as a government leader? How do you get them to take this responsibility? How do you get them to take it seriously?
I think there's three big changes that are happening. One is, as we just heard, companies are seeing corporate social responsibility as core to the business. So it's not an afterthought, it's core to the business, so there's a welcome audience. Secondly, people are demonstrating their power as consumers. So people are expressing their preferences, the brand matters, the reputation matters. People are demanding certain things, whether it's environmental products or a sensitivity to other issues like education or to labor conditions. That's being demanded by the consumer. And the third thing, which is perhaps surprising for me to say, so governments are recognizing the limitations. And if you look at the biggest distribution networks in Africa, they're nothing to do with governments now. It's probably Coke and Pepsi. If you look at the change in telecommunications, you know, where previously, 50 years ago, governments ran post offices and telecom companies in the public sector, the telecommunications network hold within them the possibility of transferring financial products, of making it possible for microcredit to work, for remittances to happen, as well as the communications that people can happen. If you look at Africa at the moment, a third of school places are not provided by governments or states, but by voluntary sector, private agencies, private companies of one sort or another. So the scope for partnership is now just enormous. And I think sometimes we do not see, sitting here or sitting in our own offices, just how the potential for these partnerships is extended right across the world, making a difference in education, the environment, and social responsibility generally. Take the environment, carbon disclosure, carbon-friendly products. Most companies that take it up because they're interested, because the consumers are interested, but just think of the opportunities to change the world as a result of that. And if governments can understand that they have to make it possible for companies to make these changes, then I think this partnership between companies, people, and some of the infrastructure that can be provided by governments can actually be transformative over the next few years. And I repeat, I don't believe we'll ever meet the Millennium Development Goals unless there's a private, voluntary sector and government partnership. And if that is true, we better get that partnership working pretty quickly.
Your Majesty, what does government have to do? What's its role? How does it encourage, how does it change its behavior in order to encourage this activity on the part of the corporation? What's working? What do you find it takes to get government thinking differently about this issue?
Talking to each other. That helps, doesn't it? And there's a lot more of that happening now about the potential for doing things. Incentives, making it possible for people to do certain things that otherwise they wouldn't have done. For example, we gave a tax incentive for pharmaceutical companies doing R&D for tropical, non-industrial country diseases to make it possible for them to move into that area. And if you take, for example, what Queen Rania has been most involved in recently, the vaccination initiative, that is a public sector, private sector partnership that by borrowing on the capital markets, it has been possible for charities and for governments to come together to raise $4 billion, making it possible to vaccinate 500 million children over the next few years and save 5 million lives and perhaps more as a result of it. Now, that wouldn't have been possible without that public-private partnership, and it involves the financial institutions, pharmaceutical companies, it involves the charities that make up Gavi, and to Queen Rania's credit and all her board, they've done a magnificent job, and Bill Gates and the foundation have been involved, but it's also involved governments. Now, that is 5 million lives being saved as a result of one initiative. Now think of the power of doing that in other areas of health, other areas of education, and in the environment as a whole.
Want to pick up?
Well, I think it's firstly very important to educate governments about and demonstrate to governments that projects can and change can happen through these collaborative and innovative partnerships. And that they don't, and sometimes it's about the governments letting go and realizing that we don't have the specialty and the skills that can deal with these issues. Let's leave it for NGOs and private sector organizations to move forward with them. And it's through demonstration of successful models that we see that happening. So for example, in Jordan, we have a group of CEOs who got together, adopted an impoverished area in East Amman, and adopted a comprehensive sustainable development program where they would go into the schools, repair them. They've established a library for children there. They've given out 200 scholarships, invested in the physical and social infrastructure of the area with fantastic results. And the government looked upon this model and realized, they're doing stuff that we can't do. Perhaps we should look at these collaborative partnerships more seriously. And also governments need to create the enabling environment, give the civil society more room for maneuverability, trust them a little bit more, support them, give the private sector some incentives for giving. As you know, for example, the United States is a great example of a place that gives the enabling environment and incentivizes private giving. And that's something that can also push the sector forward.
Well, I think we've made a very strong and clear kind of affirmative case for what this activity, why it's important, and how it benefits both sides. But I guess if we want to be now a little bit more realistic, we see that there's an awful lot of these programs that don't necessarily work. There's an awful lot of efforts that start, with flashbulbs and pledges, and ultimately don't achieve much impact. So, John, why do so many of these initiatives actually not work, and what does it take to make them work?
Well, I think you've hit the key issue that really causes business leaders to hesitate about corporate social responsibility. Often it's a very charismatic leader, either in the private sector or in the public sector, that causes you or twists your arm to get you involved, or it's a group like the World Economic Forum or the UN, and almost all of them don't pass the sustainability of time. And they don't have a replicatable process, the metrics that grow with it, etc. And what is different this time that really makes me completely committed to this program, and why I think it will be very successful in the long term, is we've realized that you've got to address both basic needs, education, job creation, economic plans for a country, and bring it together to be successful. And none of us have the skills to do that by ourselves. So the theme of this year's WEF, innovation and collaboration, is what this is about. You bring skills that none of us have by ourselves, and you develop those relationships over time to work very uniquely together. So let me give you a couple case points. Our network academies with 2.5 million students trained, we did with the UN and to 165 countries around the world, trained 700,000 employees per year. But then we found those employees can't get jobs unless you have a policy that really creates the economic job environment for it. So as we went into Jordan with the World Economic Forum and a very progressive government leadership, it was 17 companies from the World Economic Forum, 17 Jordanian companies, 11 NGOs. As we went into the Partnership for Lebanon, it was a number of the high-tech companies, a number of companies in the region in terms of rebuilding Lebanon after the conflict that occurred there, the ability to bring in an economic plan as well as a basic needs plan for relief. And as you go into sub-Saharan Africa, you suddenly begin to look at working with organizations such as Habitat for Humanity on basic needs, then the ability to do education and gender balanced in terms of the education. That doesn't work without teachers, without borders, to really train the teachers for the future, as we're losing so many of our teachers there. Then you do the job creation together. So it's really this combination is different this time, and you can see it working in business. It will drive productivity for the next decade in terms of collaboration and innovation, but it's the ability of companies to work together and success after success. And once you've done it once, and you've learned from your mistakes, you begin to understand each other's strengths, limitations, or government or business of NGO, then each time you do it again, you get faster and faster and faster. And so I think it's that combination, whether you call it tipping points, market transitions, or whatever turning points in society, where suddenly we can do something that's never been done before. And I think it's going to have traction that will last regardless of the leader or the groups involved.
John, you're always the optimist. That's great. Indra, these are hard things to do. A lot of these efforts fail. You've been a pioneer at PepsiCo and personally in this area. What goes wrong, and what does it really take to actually make these initiatives be sustainable and not just be window dressing in public relations?
Well, I tell you, these sort of social programs go against what corporations stand for, really, because these programs are by nature very large. They're very long-term oriented, and we don't control all of the elements that have to work together to come to a solution. Corporations hate that, because what we'd like to do is to have complete control over what we're doing. We'd like to see measurable progress, and if we don't, we shift to the next program, because we are models of efficiency. Now, we are signatories to the Millennium Development Goals. We are passionate about the MDGs, but if we take any one goal, we don't know who owns it. We don't know who owns it for Africa. We know there are about 15 organizations working on a particular Millennium Development Goal, but we don't have the time to go to 15 organizations and deal with 15 administrations and 15 rules and regulations. We want to make a difference because we in companies are first parents, citizens of the community, citizens of the country, citizens of the world. We are good people. We have a soul. But we get frustrated by these public policy issues. So it would help us enormously if each MDG could have an accountable person who then coordinates all of the organizations under them, and everybody is held accountable for progress. And then you're tapping into the best of the public sector and making progress on a big social scale to the benefit of both of us. To me, that's real partnership. Use our efficiency apparatus and our capabilities, and we'll help you move social goals forward, which is what you're very good at, and together we can move society forward.
And because Indira suggested us, we're holding a business conference in April to bring together businesses that are interested in individual aspects of the Millennium Development Goals, asking certain of them to sponsor and to lead in the private sector work on that, and bringing governments and the private sector together in that way. So we're not just talking about this partnership, we're trying to make it come alive and use all the great assets that private sector companies have. Distribution networks is one thing that we underestimate. The willingness to make the supply chain bigger in the countries in which they are operating, training their employees, giving health advice, HIV/AIDS advice to employees. All these things are possible, but Indira's right. Someone's got to take a charge, and if we now recognize it's not just governments that are responsible for the Millennium Development Goals, but it's the whole of society, and companies are at the center of this, then companies will have to take charge of particular areas and work with other governments in other countries to make it happen. And I think that's a big advance 7 years into the Millennium Development Goals. It gives me some hope that in the next 7 years we can make more progress.
Mr. Wang?
I think the government and companies play different roles for social responsibility. And apart from the efforts of government and companies, we think we still need the support from the society itself. And I'd like to give you an example. China Mobile, we are doing things for environment protection. We try to collect and recycle the abandoned cell phone batteries. 2 years ago, in 2006, we have only collected about 60,000 waste batteries, although we give our subscribers the free airtime and the gift as return. But people didn't understand. But next year, in 2007, we collected about 3 million. So we think we need the education, we need the support from the society for the environmental protection.
Okay. This effort is, I think, is growing in steam. I think more and more companies are getting better at it. I think governments are starting to, as Her Majesty said, let go a little bit of sub-issues and not try to be responsible for everything. But I guess we also have to confront the question of what are the limits. Peter, how much can you do? How much time and energy and money can a company really spend on these issues? And how do you decide that?
I think it's a very difficult question. I think we've got to come back to the basic fact that most companies' biggest contribution they make to broader society is by being a good company, by being a good provider of banking services, by being a good provider of mobile telecoms or drinks or technology. It's through that wealth creation, through that innovation, through the ability to make it happen. That is the core function of businesses. It doesn't mean that the things we do as well or the way we do these things shouldn't be designed to really ensure that we are helping address and tackle some of the issues our world is facing. But if we lose sight of our core function of serving our customers and creating shareholder value, well, if we lose sight of that, we'll all be out of our jobs anyway, so it'll be a fairly sort of short conversation. But I think the boundaries on what business does and what governments do and what NGOs do are becoming increasingly blurred. But I'm actually not worried about that. I actually think that's quite a good thing. I think that sense of engagement and exploration as to what things you can do, what things we can do, is a good process. But it isn't one. You have to be able to tolerate a certain degree of ambiguity if you're going to engage in this.
Peter, you didn't tell me how much. How do you decide how much?
How much? Well,
5% of your profits, or 3% of your profits, or how do you decide how much? How do you have that discussion with your board?
We have a very animated discussion pretty well all through the organization. I actually think the thing that I'm most concerned about is how much of the time and energy and management talent is spent on different things. And that's why I think the key to this is not to say that it's either or. It's not to say that there's, I do business and then in my X% of my time or my money, I do good things. The trick is to make your business the good thing. And so the trick is to find that sweet spot where you can make money for your shareholders, you can serve your customers, but you are also helping address some of the big issues. To give you a practical example for us, we have put an enormous amount of focus into building up the specialized advisory and financing capabilities for clean and renewable energy. And we're committed to providing billions of dollars of financing for this across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Now, I see that. I make no apology that we fully intend to make lots of money out of doing this. But it's also something that I think is incredibly important it's a way we can play our role in addressing the issues of climate change. So I actually think if you start getting into the sort of trap of saying, I'm going to pull this back out of my business activity, be it money or resources, and spend it on the doing good stuff, then I think you've in a sense once missed the point. One is in the wrong sort of discussion about the role of companies.
Indra, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, Peter, I think the points you made are excellent, and the question you asked, Michael, is a really good one because our time is limited. And because these are long-term projects, it's very easy to be caught up with short-termism and say, let's cut investment in these projects. I'd argue that the only way to make sure that these projects survive in corporations is to make sure that even if they start off as social programs, downstream you've got to embed them into the economic equation of the company. What I mean by that, initially you might be working on water projects in Nigeria or Mali or whatever, but long term, if you don't develop that country to give you goods and services that you can sell and make money with downstream, I think it could die a death downstream, especially if a CEO changes, it could also change. So I think it can start off as a social responsibility project. It's got to evolve into one where the economics make sense for both the company and the country. And I think that's the utopian goal with all of these projects, because it's good for society, it's good for the company, and it's more than the emotion, it's hard dollars and cents.
Michael, if I could jump in, I think it also ties to how closely what you're trying to do in corporate social responsibility ties to your core competency, which I think you articulated very well. If your core competency is in networking, it's a lot easier to bring networking academies in, education. If your core competency is helping countries transform and you give back and then you'll get more business there, then it ties tighter. So it's your ability to outline what is your vision for your corporate social responsibility, what can you really do that is dramatically different, and what do you do in the short term. A large part of why we give is our employees want us to. And we're the number 6 best place to work in America, according to some of the recent surveys on it. So our retention rate ties to doing this. So our employees like to get involved in the vision, etc. So it's kind of thinking about it, long-term vision. What do you do differently than your peers? And then what do you do in the short run? And to the point that was just made, you've got to make it replicatable. There's nothing worse than not getting involved and getting involved and then withdrawing. So sustainability is what business should bring. We tend to think more than 4 years or 8 years at a time.
Let's go back to our government leaders. Should business be involved in everything, Her Majesty? Are there any limits of issues that business should stop and government should take over?
I think it very much depends on the priorities for the region. So, for example, in the Middle East and North Africa region, my part of the world, we are presented with a demographic challenge. And I think we've all heard about this, the fact that over 70% of our population on average is under the age of 30, and the challenge of creating 100 million jobs by the year 2020. Now that is a daunting challenge, but it's only half the challenge. The other half is to provide the graduates that will fill these jobs, because it's not just about the number of graduates, but how many of these graduates have the right training and skills, how many of them have the right attitude and aptitude, how many of them are innovators and creative thinkers. And although our region has been one of the biggest spenders on education, that spending and educational achievement has not necessarily translated into more economic opportunities, because our educational system was producing graduates with skills that are not relevant to the market. Who knows what the market needs more than the actual private sector themselves. So we have, for example, a program that we launched in 1999 called Injaz, which translates into achievement. And that program started off in Jordan with the participation of about 2,000 members from the private sector, who mentor young people. They adopt schools, and they pass on life skills to these young people, everything from life planning to economics to leadership and entrepreneurial skills to how to manage risk and how to pursue an opportunity. And as a result, we're seeing young Jordanians forging ahead and breaking bold paths with their savvy new skills. So you have the private sector downloading its knowledge to these young people. And this program has become part of an important part of the job jigsaw, along with accelerated economic educational reform and more involvement of the private sector. This program fills the gap and therefore makes that challenge not as daunting. So our government has had to sort of rethink the way it does business and realize that, even in the field of education, it is not just about governments. In fact, there's so much to be gained by working with private sector companies and individuals.
Prime Minister, are there risks of working with the private sector? Are there limits of working with the private sector?
I don't think there's any limits to the partnerships that can be developed between public, private sector, and indeed voluntary sector involved as well. And I think this old battle for territory, where the public sector was demanding its area and the private sector its area, is over. I think it's about forging the partnerships that are in the best public interest. And it's not, just a developing country issue. And I think we should remember that in every advanced industrial country, if you take companies concerned about the environment, yes, your employees are interested in doing it, and yes, your consumers are interested in you being environmentally friendly and conscious of all the sustainability issues, but actually it can become the source of profit in the longer term, and sometimes in the shorter term as well. So it's actually core to the business that you've got an environmentally sustainable way of doing things. And I think what Queen Rania said about education is important as well, because if you look at every advanced industrial country, the problem that we now face is that the demand for unskilled work is collapsing, and an employee, to be an employee, otherwise they will be unemployable, will need a skill. And we've all got a duty working together to make sure, A, that young people realise that without a skill they will be unemployable, and B, that there are jobs, aspirations, hopes, ambitions that they can have that the private sector can deliver for them if they actually get these skills. So it's a really dramatic change. The future for unskilled work in the developed countries is really grim, but the future for people who get skills is almost endless opportunity. They can travel and work in every part of the world. Now, we've got a joint task ahead to persuade people to get the skills and to play our part together in educating people for the jobs that we need in the future. So partnership is where it's going to be. As Queen Rania says for Jordan, it's going to be for every country in the world.
Well, we're just about out of time. I'd like to give all of us on the panel a chance to kind of give a suggestion. If there's people in this audience and there's people watching this session that have an opportunity to move ahead on this agenda that we've been talking about today. There's a lot of corporate leaders here, there's a lot of government leaders here. So if you could tell them one thing about how to make this work in their organization, in their government, in their corporation, what would the one piece of advice be? John, you want to start out?
I think you're seeing the nature of work change from being primarily oriented toward a person to really a collaborative type of approach. And the one suggestion would be that collaboration is the future of work, productivity, effective competitiveness on a global basis. It's also the key to corporate social responsibility. So the one suggestion would be to get involved with a group, whether it's the World Economic Forum, the UN initiatives, etc., and to become part of a program and learn how this collaboration really works. And as you figure it out, you'll find that exactly what you're doing in your corporate social responsibility programs will come straight into business. So my suggestion would be get involved with one of the organizations that are already making progress in this. And as you find that you get involved, it not only makes a difference for your employees, it will really make a difference for the bottom line as well.
Majesty, what would you suggest to a government leader sitting in the audience about how they could really take advantage of the power of this collaboration with the private sector?
Well, actually, I'd like to address the private sector and perhaps. No, I think to my point of view would be to deepen the process of integrations, as you mentioned, Peter, of making sure that the social causes that you adopt are very relevant to your core business. Because I've heard it said that it's not what you do with your money after you've earned it that matters, but it's how you earn the money that determines your success and your value added to society. But if you allow me, I'd also like to maybe just, as somebody that comes from outside the business world, to just veer away for a minute. When we talk about social responsibility, most of the time we're addressing causes that relate to the environment, sustainability, issues that are related to the Millennium Development Goals, etc. But I'd like to submit that there is one millennium challenge that I think we need to address urgently, and I think that the corporate world can play a very important role in, and that is the poverty of knowledge and respect and understanding that exists between different cultures. One that is very much accentuated, for example, between my part of the world and the West. And we see it in the mutual mistrust and suspicion that affects our economies, affects the way we do business, and affects our security. And this is not a job for one individual, one sector. I think all of us have a role to play in making sure that there is more tolerance and acceptance in our schools, universities, neighborhoods, places of worship, and in the workplace. And I'd like to refer to this as corporate multicultural responsibility. And for example, international corporations already do business with the Muslim world. They already have established lines of communication across zones of culture and time. They're already at the forefront of cultural exchange. And they need to understand the culture in which they work in, otherwise they can risk losing out on in the scramble to tap into huge markets and to maximize profits. So it's in their vested interest to understand cultures. So increasingly corporations can play a very important role in bridging this multicultural gap, and they can do it at three levels. Firstly, at the core business level, where they ensure that they have a diversified workforce and they foster an environment in the workplace that encourages constant engagement and exchange. So, for example, employees could be sent to intern at a global company's international offices. The second level is at the community level, where they can establish social initiatives that create multicultural goodwill. And thirdly, through advocacy. As you know, multinationals and corporations have very strong lines of communications and networks and have very powerful voices. And they're connected to business leaders, policymakers, and government officials in countries. And they can use that voice to advocate for stronger policies that encourage greater acceptance and understanding.
Okay, I've been given the we got just a little bit of time left signal. So, Indra, what's your piece of advice?
Doing projects that have broader societal impact are very important, but my one request to all companies is please don't sign on to something brand new. Don't try to start a new organization, because too many of them exist. If you're looking for something that's comprehensive, start with the MDGs. We all have an obligation to get it over the finish line, sign on to them, it's comprehensive, let's get it done.
Peter?
I'd just reinforce the point about thinking of it and using the same sorts of disciplines and rigor as you would any other business decision, reflecting on your question to me about what sort of resources. It's the same as the decision within the bank as how much resources I put into credit cards or derivatives or into China or India. It should have that same sort of rigor and discipline. We should have the same rigor and discipline on the people you put into it, in the alliances and partnerships you make. I think sometimes business makes its contribution, broader contribution to society, less effective because it forgets all the things that has made it successful as a business. It just leaves those behind. So take all those disciplines and skills with you. Mr. Wang?
I think the supporting and understanding from our shareholders are very important for us. So, you know,
wow, is that an understatement?
We were afraid when we wanted to do some charity project, we were afraid we could not get the support from our shareholders. Fortunately, once some of our foreign directors gave us the proposal to set up a charity foundation, and that's very good. So recently we presented a new project to provide 30 million renminbi to sponsor the AIDS orphans. We got a lot of support from our foreign directors.
Prime Minister, you're our closer.
I suppose take up the 5 brilliant ideas that have come from the other panelists. I think each business here should look at its core activities, then look at the Millennium Development Goals, education for all, cutting infant mortality, providing water, sustainable environment, and look at what it can contribute to the meeting of these goals, and then join us in trying to bring private sector and public sector together to do it. Because what would be the worst thing that could happen over the next few years is having set one set of goals, we fail to meet them, create massive disillusionment, and can't come back to people again with a message of hope. So if we can meet what we've set out to do by us working together, it'll make a huge difference. So look at what your core business can offer in the meeting of these Millennium Development Goals.
And I think we would be amiss if we left this panel without acknowledging the leadership of somebody like Prime Minister Gordon Brown, who has always consistently looked beyond his direct mandate and short-term political gains, and always made it his priority to look at the larger global picture, and of focusing on issues like MDGs, like he's been a tremendous support for us on Gavi, and looking at global education. I think it is through this kind of leadership and mentoring that it's given us the push to really make great achievements in these fields. So I'd like to thank you personally very much for all the support that you've given us.
Thank you for the inspiration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So hopefully everybody in the audience has an agenda to go back home and follow. Thanks to the panel for a great discussion.